Twincam has been away for a couple of months, and so to gently reconcile us with our silly old cars, we're going to take a moment, titillate our tastes, and discuss 10 nuggets of useless automotive trivia. We'll begin in the Netherlands, nugget 1 directing us towards DAF, a company you probably know best for building trucks, but until Volvo bought part of their business, DAF also built cars, their principal feature known as Variamatic. Variamatic was the first installation of a continuously variable transmission in a mass-produced passenger car, and as it was DAF's big boast, you had to have it. You could not buy a DAF car with a manual gearbox. The problem is that this was the late 1950s, and though Variamatic worked perfectly well, it wasn't particularly intelligent. Variamatic did not discriminate, gearing whatever power it was sent either up or down depending on your needs. So if your DAF 66, for example, would hit 80 miles per hour, then it would also hit 80 miles per hour in reverse. This quirk of engineering certainly wasn't lost on the Dutch racing scene, who were more than happy to take a congregation of DAFs to the likes of Zandvoort, where they'd line them up on the grid, facing the wrong way, the ensuing carnage ensuring the humour of everyone. Traipsing further through transmissions, and we find ourselves with Alfa Romeo for our second nugget of trivia, this time centering on four-wheel drive. And when they launched their new mid-size 156 in 1997, such a feature was notably absent. Notable because the 156 was a development of the old 155, a car which was available with all-wheel drive. Now sure, Alfa knew they had to modernise, but to simply drop such a successful system and revert to front drive only seemed like a step backwards. Further to the 155, Alfa Romeo were also producing a four-wheel drive version of their big 164 saloon, complete with a system that allowed for anything between 0 and 100% of the drive to be sent to either axle. Fast forward to 2004, however, and the 156's successor, the Alfa 159, made its debut, complete with four-wheel drive. So you might think that the 156 missed out on all its wheels being driven, but it didn't. For reasons known only to the Italians, the 156 remained in production through to 2007, and after the launch of its son, it too received Alfa Romeo's all-new Q4 system, again for reasons known only to the Italians. To make matters worse, these run-out 156s were only available with four-wheel drive, and back in the mid-90s the old 155 system was one of the best we'd ever seen. Often forgotten is the fact that it was the same system that dominated the World Rally Championship under the Delta Integrale. The Alfa 156 therefore rejected two great four-wheel drive systems, waiting until it was replaced before finally receiving a third. The Italian car market features a fair few peculiarities, but some have been enforced by their tax system, including heavy duties once placed on engines over 2 litres in capacity. This brings us to nugget number 3, and a couple of very well-known and well-regarded engines that were sleeved down to fit into that lower tax class. Such a trick even reached Ferrari, who in the 1970s and 80s were producing cars like the 308. In most of the world, this is all we got, a 3-litre, 8-cylinder sports car. But for select markets including Italy, Portugal and New Zealand, that famous transverse V8 was sleeved down to produce the Ferrari 208, complete with a 100 brake horsepower drop to 155 bhp. From 1982, however, the 208 was replaced by the 208 Turbo, bumping power back up to 220 brake horsepower. Imported cars faced a similar fate, sales of TVR's V8S foundering thanks to the tax rate. Their solution was to take its 3.9-litre Rover V8 and sleeve it down to produce a 2-litre Rover V8, making up the difference with an Eaton supercharger, allowing a very respectable 230 brake horsepower. The Rover V8, however, brings us to our fourth nugget of trivia, because I'm sure you're all at least somewhat aware of the partnership that existed between Rover and Honda between 1979 and 2005. Most famously, this deal resulted in a few Honda-designed cars being rebadged as the likes of the Triumph Acclaim and the Rover 400. But did you know that Honda rebadged a solitary Rover model, selling it only in the Japanese market between 1993 and 1998 as the Honda Crossroad? Of course, this is a badge-engineered Land Rover Discovery, introduced to give Honda a proper 4x4 through which to compete with the likes of Mitsubishi, Nissan and Toyota, but one that remains today the only V8 powered Honda product. What's also interesting, however, is that the Crossroad was also built by Rover at their Solihull plant before being shipped over to Japan, and that paints a bit of a contrast to the Rover badged Hondas that we all know that bit better, all European examples of which were also built in Great Britain by Rover themselves. We're carrying on that tradition for number 5 and bringing in the Metro, because frankly it wouldn't be a twin cam video without at least some Metro-based rambling. And in 1990 they launched the totally re-engineered and fabulously acclaimed Rover Metro to replace the now outmoded and outdated Austin Metro. But in this new range of cars was a rethink as to what would be allowed to carry the Rover badge. Sure, a Super Mini wearing a Longship was a relatively big deal, but they drew the line at a commercial variant. Since the early 1980s, however, Metro panel vans had been a stalwart of small businesses up and down the country, but unwilling to update the Metro van, Rover was still subject to demand. So for a further 2 years, they carried on building, on the same production lines, the mechanically almost totally different Austin Metro to fill whatever demand was still left for a van. But what makes this fact worthy of this video is the fact that in all Rover price guides, they would still special order you a passenger version of the old Austin Metro until 1992, just in case, for whatever reason, you still wanted a significantly worse car in essentially the same body shell. We'll stay in Great Britain but shift across to Coventry for nugget the 6th, and what was known as the Roots Group. Most famous for their Hillman and Humber marques, Roots began to struggle financially in the late 1960s and were joined in their plight by the French Simca. To their rescue came Chrysler, crossing the Atlantic as the only one of the US Big Three to have not yet made it in Europe. By the mid-70s, Roots and Simca had been joined at the waist and had had their cars rebadged as Chryslers. But after only a decade on the continent, the Americans retreated in 1978, selling their European arm to Peugeot, who rebadged Roots and Simca again to become Talbot before killing them off in 1986. But a lot of what Peugeot became in the 1990s was thanks to the technology and tooling from both Roots and Simca, the Peugeot 309, for example, being an orphan child of Talbot. Until only a few years ago, that's where the story ended. But in 2021, Peugeot merged with Chrysler, meaning the Americans' former subsidiary is now back in cahoots with Detroit. What's now known as Stellantis brings us to number 7 though, because Opel and Vauxhall, their German and British subsidiaries, used to belong to General Motors, meaning it's now them who sit as the one of the big three without a significant European presence. But I digress, because back in 2004, the then GM-owned design studios began installing Easter eggs in each of their models. It's all thanks to a chap named Karim Jordemena, whose job it was to design strengthening ribs for Opel and Vauxhall interior plastics. It sounds like a very mundane job, but after an intervention from his son, he decided to draw a shark. And for 20 years now, nearly every Opel or Vauxhall has had a shark hidden somewhere inside. Our snappy friend's debut was in the Corsa D, where it sits on the glove box hinge facing the passenger door. In the Adam, it's below the mat in the centre console, and in this Astra K, it's both beneath the cup holders and on the glove box hinge. From one former General Motors subsidiary to another, and for trivia nugget number 8, we land on Saab, a company with 3 distinct eras: the 2-strokes, the 4-strokes, and finally General Motors. Amongst most of us, however, the middle of these 3 eras is the one we view most fondly, characterised chiefly by the Saab 99, a car designed in the mid-1960s as only their second all-new model and known all over the world as a bastion of safety, quality and sensibility. But what actually made the 99 and later 900 move was not originally designed by Saab in Sweden. Instead, the 99's engine and gearbox came across the North Sea from Triumph in England. Their overhead cam slant 4 seeing its first use in the 99 before powering the homegrown Triumph's Dolomite and TR7. But while these 2 cars were rear-wheel drive, the Saab, of course, was front-wheel drive, meaning they nabbed and uprated the gearbox from the older Triumph 1300, sitting below a backwards-facing engine and distributing drive to the front wheels. Now, Triumph are a company I've previously described as Britain's BMW, and for all intents and purposes, they were, but nobody does it quite like the Bavarians themselves, our subject for Nugget 9. In the 1960s, BMW were beginning to strut their stuff, producing a coherent range of premium saloon cars that people were beginning to notice. And thanks to their touring car success towards the end of the decade, they were building pedigree as well. The Halo, however, was what became the first M Car, a development of their new 6 coupe known as the 3-litre CSL. In order to homologate this new model for racing, however, they fitted a few CSLs with this ridiculous boot-mounted spoiler. The problem is that due to German regulations, it wasn't actually legal to use on the road. Their solution was to sell the car with the wing in the boot, complete with mounting hardware and instructions, just on the off chance you wanted to do something with it. TÜV were happy as it was technically an ornament, and the FIA were happy because it was still sold with the car. But on to things that were not sold with cars, and our 10th and final nugget of useless automotive trivia is storage. It sounds perfectly reasonable to expect some storage space in a passenger car, but many cars have compartments designed for unusual things. The new Renault 5, for example, has a total gimmick in the form of a baguette holder that clips to the centre console. More interesting, however, is the Lancia Stratos, which thanks to its ludicrously wide body has its door bins designed to take a crash helmet. You know, for when you're driving between rally stages. That's how you know when a car's really cool. Even on more normal Italian cars, however, things are a little different, because veering back towards Alfa Romeo and their small family hatch, the 147 won European Car of the Year in 2000. For something relatively modern, you might not expect the 147 to feature 3 ashtrays. 3, 2 of which are in the back, so your children can enjoy a quick smoke on the school run. In fact, that means a 3-door 147 has more ashtrays than it does opening windows. That figure is outdone, however, by one of the smallest true 4-seater cars ever produced, the original Mini, which has one for every passenger. The Mini's designer, Sir Alec Izagonis, was a chain smoker, but he says he hated distractions, which is why he designed it to be purposefully difficult to install a radio. More madness lies when we come back to door bins, and the Mini had 4 massive storage bins owing to its non-existent safety standards. But at the front, it said that Izagonis ensured they were wide enough to store bottles of spirits. As I said, no distractions, apart from alcohol and tobacco. So mercifully, that's us done for today, and thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please do click like and subscribe to TwinCam as well. I'm forever indebted to my wonderful Patreon supporters, and as TwinCam is now back full time with a video every week for the rest of the year, please feel free to support me that way by following the link in the description. And I'll have more videos coming along soon.